approached my father-in-law at the time, who lived in Newport, Rhode Island as well. He just got crushed in 2008. Previous, he was doing fix and flips, raise the roof projects, condo conversions when the market crashed. And he was looking for a new way into real estate. So he started doing this thing called creative financing about a year or a year and a half prior. Lease options, sub-twos, owner finance, because he was looking for ways to get involved in real estate without cash, without credit, without banks, right? Because that was all taken away in 2008. So I approached him and said, hey, I know that, you're revamping this real estate business. I'm like, I have no idea if I'm going to like real estate, but I'd be interested if you got some space on your team. He printed out about 100 names from expired listings. He handed me a sheet to ask a bunch of questions to fill in the information and said, all right, start making phone calls.
Welcome to the RealPropPro podcast, where strategy, innovation, and wealth converge to redefine real estate investing.
Hello, and welcome to the RealPropPro podcast. I'm your host, Ian Dietler, Sacramento-based real estate investor. This show is where we bring on real people doing real deals to share how they've built freedom through real estate. At RealPropPro, we help investors master tax liens, fix and flips, multifamily, and so much more. If you're ready to take action and build wealth with your team, check out some free tools at RealPropPro.com. Today's guest is Zach Beach, a real estate investor, author, and coach with Smart Real Estate Coach. He's built a business around creative finance strategies, acquiring properties using lease options, seller financing, and subject to. He does all of that without using large amounts of capital or traditional loans. We'll get into how he got started, how creative financing works, and how he helps others break free from the 9-to-5 by learning to control real estate with less risk and more flexibility. Zach, welcome to the show.
Ian, it's a pleasure, my man. I'm glad that we were able to put this together.
Yeah, I'm so happy you were able to make it, man. We met about a month or so when you came to our RIA, and I just loved all the stuff that you're talking about. It really resonated with me, and it's really something that I'm, really passionate about. So I'm so glad that you came and you spoke to our group, and that you even spent some time the next day with us and kind of talked a little bit more specifics.
Yeah, no, it was a blast. It was one of my longest trips of the year. I flew down to Arizona, and then up to NorCal, then back to Arizona. But you guys had an amazing group, amazing space. Quite passionate about California real estate just because we've been doing it in the Fresno area and Southern California for a long time, as we have two longtime community members and now coaches that have been doing deals out of there for a long time. So I don't care what they say about California. There are still lots of creative financing deals available out there.
Awesome. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show and share with the listeners all of your knowledge and all the stuff you've learned over the years. So I really appreciate you coming on. So I'd like to start all the way back in the beginning. Can you talk a little bit about where you grew up and what life was like growing up as a kid?
Yeah, I was actually trying to explain this to my son the other day. So I grew up in Central Massachusetts. I grew up with a single mother. My dad was in and out of our house for quite some time. So, considered almost being like an only child, because I do have a couple siblings. I have two brothers, but they're 10, 11 years older than me. So basically a single child. And my mom, I would like to describe her as like a hippie. So it was pretty much free reign growing up. I was definitely a poor kid that grew up in a rich town. So as you can imagine, that chip is still on my shoulder. Still happens to be there till this day. So when I was trying to have this conversation with my son, because he quite frankly lives a much better life than I did growing up, I tried to explain to him, like, just because you want that brand new $400 bat to go play Little League doesn't mean that money just falls from the sky. Instead, you gotta work for it. And quite frankly, that's what I had to learn how to do growing up as a young kid with a single mom.
That's wonderful. It sounds like it was, an interesting household. What was life like growing up, going through high school and stuff? Was that, you said it was kind of free reign. What was that like?
Oh yeah, it was for sure free reign. No, high school years were good. I had quite a time. I was always invested in sports, but I was always the kid in high school that my teachers, never thought much was going to come about, or at least that was my perspective. So the only reason why I actually ended up doing decently well my senior year is because my teachers told me I couldn't go to college. But quite frankly, I mean, my whole life was kind of involved around sports and uh and really like living the the freest life possible, because there was zero control going on in my life at that point in time. I had quite a few stints with battling drug abuse through high school and then through parts of college, but was able to manage that as well. And actually, in our Amazon bestselling book, I Real Estate on Your Terms, I actually brought up in how I went through multiple panic attacks, dealing with death of my father and some challenges that I was going through in my early 20s. And quite frankly, I learned a lot from dealing with all those different challenges, and it's probably made me, a better father, husband, real estate investor, business owner because I went through all those things.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. You said you had went to college. What did that look like? Did you finish, and what type of studies were you focused on?
See, you're just like my teachers. Did you finish? No, I'm just kidding. Well, I went to school, I mean, not knowing what I wanted to do, right? Because I just wanted to, quite frankly, get out of the area in which I was in and go find something new. So I applied to like 14 colleges. I got accepted by a small school that doesn't even exist anymore in downtown Boston. It was known as Bay State. And we actually, it was really cool because we lived right on the Commons, our Common Ave, Com in Boston, which is beautiful. It's Copley Plaza. We were in a like a giant brownstone. In my dorm room was 6 guys, and we all lived in a library. This was so no walls, 6 beds, all guys from different parts. I had a guy from Maine, Hawaii, Hartford, Connecticut. So it was people from all over the place. It was almost like Real World if they had a camera in there. Uh, and it was very interesting. But I learned a lot at that school. It actually allowed me to think like as a college student. That's where I actually learned how to be a student. Was at Bay State. So I thank them, even though they're no longer in existence, for giving me that first chance. And then eventually I transferred to a state school known as UMass Dartmouth. It's part of the UMass systems. Because I just did not want to stack as much debt as that 1 year was providing me because of that, because it was a private school. So went to the a state school that was closest to my girlfriend at the time, which is now my wife, as she was living in Rhode Island. So we made it so that we were within a decent distance of each other. And then once I kind of got to college, ended up studying marketing and finance and did decent. It didn't, school still doesn't necessarily get me going. I'm definitely more of a hands-on entrepreneur type, but I made it and I graduated and, I had some degrees. And I actually lived through an interesting time because the Boston bomber, I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
He went to my school. So at UMass Dartmouth. Well, the younger brother did, and not to make this like one of those podcasts here, but yeah, he went to my school. So I actually remember the FBI and helicopters flying into our school because they couldn't find him. So they started to look at the school to see if he was in the area. Luckily, I wasn't in Boston at the time, and quite frankly, there's a lot of people that got hurt in that scenario. But my college, the original one, Bay State, was a block from where that happened. So it was a very eerie scenario growing up. And I actually didn't even go to my graduation that year because everybody was worried about repeats, and because he went to that school and he had friends at that school, so they were worried. So I didn't go to my graduation. I sat at my girlfriend's a house in Newport, Rhode Island during that day, and just, called it a day and got as far away from that area as possible during that time frame. I also learned a lot during college in regards to really working hard, because my wife lived in Newport, Rhode Island, which is an awesome, what do you call it, town, like tourist town. So in my senior year, we decided that we were eventually going to live in Newport after we graduated. So I went and I started knocking on bars' doors, like actual restaurants. And I remember I went to a restaurant. It's right on the water, because I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, because I was, I didn't know what I wanted to do, because I just went to school because everybody told me what not to do. So this is a big learning lesson for me. I was actually knocking on some bars, and I went and I spoke to this gentleman. He said, "Hey, Zach, like, good luck. You're never going to get a bartender or a barback job in the town of Newport, because you don't know anyone and you've never done this before." And I looked at him. I was like, "Well, how do people get started then if you need experience and you need to know people?" Like, and he was like, "I don't know what to tell you, but you're not going to be working here." So I went to the next bar, and I thought to myself, I better come up with a better pitch. So I went to the next one, and they were during their Sunday cleanup, and I walked in. I was like, "I'm looking for the owner," and I talked to him. His name was Chris, and went to him and I said, "Hey, look, I'm a marketing major. I can help fill this bar. If you'd be willing to hire me, and while I do that, like during the week, if you guys are looking for any barback help or then I'd be happy to do some work with that as well." And basically that pitch worked. Never did a single thing with marketing, but ended up barbacking and then eventually bartending at that spot for the next 5 years. So a lot of interesting things happened during this time frame. I know, but it would have been a bit of a tangent, but
I love it. I think that's what the listeners want. They want to hear, your life growing up and your stories, and basically what type of journey you went on, like all these different things that just really shape who you are, and what type of business that you've created. So kind of getting a little bit more into that. How did you start to get in real estate?
Yeah, well, as you can imagine, bartending, it can be somewhat lucrative. What I ended up working on is I worked at an all-cash bar. It was like almost like a club. So you walk in, there's 4 bars, and there's a stage, and then there's a DJ in the back. It's a lot of fun. Like Newport, Rhode Island, if you've never been there, but it's really fun during the summer. And then it slows down. It goes from like 250,000 people to 25,000 people. So like you make all of your money during that sprint. So then I started thinking to myself, like, how else do I make money? So then I started looking into other things. So eventually I became a personal trainer to try to supplement some additional income. And then what happens is, and then I eventually got into selling supplements through Advocare and a network marketing company. So what ends up happening is you get really burnt out because you start doing a lot of things and you're juggling a lot of things. So by the time I was about 25 years old, I kind of was done with the nightlife. It was a blast. It was my second college. I learned a lot. But I kind of got to a point, because it was a family-run bar. So I kind of got to the point where I was like at the highest I was ever going to go. I got the best shifts that I was able to get without the last name, right? So I got all that to that point. So eventually I was like, I need to figure out what I want to do next. So I really had a fork in the road when it comes to that type of industry. You really either move into management, or me being an entrepreneur, I would have eventually started looking into how do I own restaurants or own bars, or you decide to make a pivot out of the industry completely, because that's not the lifestyle for everybody. And after further conversations with my wife Kayla, we were like, we don't want to be up all night long and live a completely different, like, opposite schedule from our entire families. And if we want to have kids, like, that's a tough way to live. Even though some people were able to do it, it's just not what we wanted. So I approached my father-in-law at the time, who lived in Newport, Rhode Island as well. They moved down from central Massachusetts when we graduated from high school, and he just got crushed in 2008. Previous, he was doing fix and flips, raise the roof projects, condo conversions when the market crashed. And he was looking for a new way out of, or really a new way into real estate. So he started doing this thing called creative financing about a year or a year and a half prior. lease options, sub twos, owner finance, because he was looking for ways to get involved in real estate without cash, without credit, without banks, right? Because that was all taken away in 2008. So I approached him and said, "Hey, I know that you revamping this real estate business. I'm like, I have no idea if I'm going to like real estate. I have no idea if I'm going to be good at real estate, but I'd be interested if you got some space on your team." And really, his team was him and my brother-in-law Nick. If you have some space on your team, like for me to pitch in, see if I like it. So he printed out about 100 names from expired listings. He handed me a sheet to ask a bunch of questions to fill in the information, and said, "All right, start making phone calls doing this. I'll listen to your calls. I'll see if I'll critique them. If you want to keep moving and get better at this, then we'll continue to have conversations." So I added that to my calendar. So in between my cat naps, between my long nights and my early mornings with bartending and personal training, I started making phone calls, and it took me almost 6 months to get to my first deal. But once I did, then I was like, all right, I'm in real estate. I really started to compound all of the skill sets that I learned from being a young kid, collecting and selling golf balls, to being a bartender and having conversations with people, to really piecing together, my college degree, and kind of put it all together. And real estate kind of was that mishmash of everything, and things started to come together, and went ahead and did my first deal. And then I kind of burned the ships like Cortez and went all in real estate. And almost 11 years later, here we are.
Nice. Well, do you remember the moment that you went in the bar and had to quit because you were in new full-time real estate?
Yeah, interesting enough, like I had this vision when I first started bartending that I was like, I'm going to give it like 4 years. I don't want to be, I just thought to myself, with my background and my history with, challenges with drugs, things like that, I'm like, I want to be out of here by like, I'm 25. Like I'll enjoy, it was almost like a second college, and almost like an internship in a way, but I got to make money. It was like I graduated from college. It was like, here, go work in this business. And this bartending business was perfect. Family run business, a lot of room to be able to kind of do your own thing and bring your own spin on things, as long as you were working hard and putting money in the cash register. They didn't really care. And honestly, I was probably one of the more strict people there. I'd show up there way early. I'd get my bar set up. I'd make sure everything was all set up, compared to some people that were, enjoying themselves. So I really got to learn the ability to kind of own something in a way. Like when I felt like when I got to that bar, I owned that bar. I needed to make sure that bar produced a ton of money, and really continue to expand on that. So once I did that, I just knew like I wanted to be out by 25. So it was right around that year. It was about April. And I did one of my first deals, and I just went to him. I said, "Hey, Chris, I'll be happy to like sub in every once in a while if you need me to, but we're making a move. I'm gonna go full time in real estate." And he was obviously supported. The reality is, in that space, the bartenders are they're gonna be turned over, and there's gonna be lots of people that are gonna want to fill that position, especially in their early 20s. So I was replaced relatively quickly, as you can imagine. And I think I only went back 1 or 2 times, and the second time I went back was almost a year later, and they just needed me to be like a celebrity bartender at that time. And by 3:00 in the morning, after that whole thing, I was exhausted. I was like, I'm never doing this again.
Yeah, you're like, I'm glad I got out of this one. I did.
Yeah, you never, like, you don't realize how much energy and how exhausting it can be to entertain a crowd of people in front of you the whole time, pour drinks, right? Manage money. Like, you're doing it all at the same time, managing like different events that happen. You got people that break out in fights over in the back, and then you gotta manage the DJ. Like, all these things are happening in this giant chaos. You just don't, you don't realize it until you take a step back, and you're like, oh my God, this was, how did I do this? But it's a perfect example of being an entrepreneur. It's like managing the chaos in the chaos consistently. And I think that's why I continued to fall in love with being an entrepreneur.
That's a great story. Can you talk about that first creative deal that you did, like how it all came together and what it sounds like you were doing some cold calling.
Oh yeah. So the first deal came from an expired listing. So expired listings, for your audience, if they don't know, it's like the property was on the market with an agent at some point in time, and then it didn't sell. So their listing expired. Then we have a database that then pulls that information, gives me the name, address, and phone numbers that I can contact. I then go ahead and make a phone call with a specific script to ask some questions. I remember this guy, property was in Jefferson, Massachusetts. It was an 1800s house, which is very normal in most parts of Massachusetts. And he was a teacher that went through a divorce, and the property had no equity. So we went ahead and we structured a deal so that way he didn't have to pay out of pocket to sell the house, right? Because if there's no equity, he's going to go list with an agent. He's got closing costs. He's going to have to pay that all out of pocket. So instead, we just said, hey, we're going to buy it. We used a strategy called buying it subject to the existing loan, which means title came to us or our company, and the mortgage remained attached to the seller's credit, and we just continued to pay that mortgage on that seller's behalf. We went ahead and bought it. Guy went ahead and moved. Everything looked great on the deal. We went ahead and we sell on rent to own is one of our main strategies, which means we sell to roughly 80% of people out there that can't qualify for bank loans, which is obviously a huge market. Then those buyers will come in. They'll give us a non-refundable deposit. They'll have the ability to buy the property in a certain period of time. They'll pay us rent over that time frame, and then eventually they go qualify for their own bank loan. Well, about 3 to 4 weeks into this, the buyer, who was a little, who had some red flags, and we would have never placed this buyer in the property now, but hindsight's 2020. Placed her in the property. She had a couple young kids. She went ahead and started testing the paint around the property, or really the dust on the windowsill, and she came back that there was lead paint. Well, my initial conversations with the seller were, hey, is there any knowledge of lead paint? And he's like, no, there's no knowledge. So I said, okay. We went and checked county records or town records. It said there's no knowledge. But this property happened to sit like in a municipality that has like 2 town halls. It's Jefferson and it's Holden. Well, the one that we checked said there's no knowledge. The one that we didn't check said there was knowledge. So now we're liable. So we had to have the tenant buyer. We had to go place her into in a hotel, right, and pay for that. And then we had to de-lead the property. Well, that de-lead job was roughly $30,000.
Wow.
And the tenant didn't just go to the Holiday Inn down the street. She ended up going to the Great Wolf Lodge for the entire week. So as you can imagine, that was the most expensive hotel bill we could possibly have done for a tenant. Fast forward this, and there's some learning lessons from that, obviously. So fast forward, that tenant buyer, we place her back in the property. She then starts defaulting on the agreement. We eventually have to go ahead and remove her, and then we go sell it on the traditional market a couple of years later. This was about 11 years. So I don't remember if we placed another tenant buyer in that property or if we ended up selling it traditionally. But what ended up happening is eventually ended up making like 80 to 90 grand off of this deal. But it was a bit challenging at first, right? Because we thought no money down, creative deal, but then we get hit with this de-lead job. So some key learning things that we obviously learned through the process was, one, all of our new agreements have this lead clause that the seller has to sign off on, right? So because they would have been liable, but we didn't have that in place. So that way we would have pushed all of that back to the seller. 2 is that tenant buyer just wasn't the quality of people that we wanted in the property. We selected a much lower non-refundable deposit that we would get nowadays. Nowadays it's like 3 to 10% up front and at least 10% over time. So there's a lot more skin in the game in that property as well. So a lot of interesting learning lessons. And of course, if you don't have your business lines of credit set up, that's what we use. We have business lines of credit. So we actually did the lead job with a business line of credit and then went ahead and the property cashed out later on. We went ahead and paid off those lines of credit, or we used other non-refundable deposits to do so. So I can just tell you that if I did it on my own, which is like one of the things that I talk about when I speak across the country, if you do it on your own, you could find yourself in these challenging positions. And if I didn't have my business partners, then that probably would have been my first and last real estate transaction, just because of all the nuances that we kind of went through. So I wish I could tell everybody, like, my first deal set me off on this massive trajectory of being an amazing real estate investor, but that first deal was very challenging and really set me up with the right mindset for real estate, which is, like, there are always going to be challenges. It's just how you approach them and then ensuring that you have certain things in place to be able to handle them. Because if you can withstand them and if you can make the right decisions, then most real estate deals will be profitable with time. And that's exactly what ended up happening, is that deal ended up making a good amount of money. It just took time to do it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's a really good story and really, like you said, really good learning lessons on that one, Um, definitely highlighting the value of having another person there or a team behind you, not only financially, but also to, maybe catch some of these things up front before you actually come across these challenges. So really appreciate you sharing that with the listeners. Can you explain the differences between the three main creative financing types? You got the lease options, you got the subject to, and you got the seller financing. Can you explain those in simple terms?
Yeah, for sure. So a lease purchase tends to be the easiest creative financing transaction because you're not necessarily owning a piece of real estate, you're just controlling it. So just think about a lease purchase in almost like two pieces. One, you have the lease agreement that's really tied, where it's like you control the property. You have certain expenses that you have on the property, and you're agreeing upon for a certain time frame. And then you have the second piece, which is like the ability to purchase it. So now you have a locked-in price or a locked-in amount of equity. So you agreed upon all that with the seller, and then that agreement allows you to go ahead and sell it to somebody else. We tend to then sell it on rent to own. That's why this structure is known as a sandwich lease, because you have a lease purchase agreement with the seller, you're in the middle, and then you have a lease purchase agreement with the buyer. So all of that still allows you to tap into what we call our 3 payday system, meaning you still get non-refundable deposits, still get cash flow, and you still build equity into these deals. So when it cashes out, but just know you're just controlling it. And then you also file what they call a notice of option or a memorandum of real estate. All that really means is you're putting a lien on the property so the seller can't sell to their uncle or their best friend while you're under agreement. So that's one strategy. I would say that's like the easiest deal to get in, because that's like your pure no money down deals, because you don't even have closing costs. You can do it via DocuSign or over the table signature with the seller. Then you have your other two strategies, which are actual closings. These are where you actually take title and you own it. The best way to kind of describe these is to make them like as extreme opposites as possible. So owner financing. Let's think of an owner financing deal is a seller that has no debt on the property, right? Free and clear. And what you're then going to do is you're going to go ahead and agree upon some specific terms with the seller, purchase price, monthly payment, time frame, and close date, right? So you're going to go ahead and close on it, and then the seller, instead of going to get a bank loan, the seller will then provide you the financing. So you go ahead and close on it, and then you just start making payments to the seller as if to the bank. The opposite strategy, right, so is known as a subject to deal, if we again stick to these two extremes. And that is, let's think of that particular type of deal as no equity. So the seller has a mortgage and no equity. So what we then do is we go buy this property, the title transfers to us, and then we keep that initial mortgage in place. And instead of paying off that loan, we just keep that debt in place. And then we make payments to the bank on the seller's behalf. So that way we still acquire title. And the reason why that second strategy or that third strategy is so popular nowadays is because there's a lot of good debt out there, like the 2%, 3%, 4%, 5% mortgages that sellers got. But there's not a lot of equity in a lot of these homes as well. So the only reason why it makes sense for somebody to buy it is to keep the existing debt in place. Because if you go get new debt, it's at 7.25%, which makes this no longer a profitable deal. So those are the three strategies that we use to acquire properties.
Great. Thanks for explaining that to the listeners. I know there's little nuances between each different strategy and different times to use it. So, I appreciate you kind of explaining that to the listeners so they have a better idea what options are out there. Because a lot of times people just think creative or just think kind of traditional, right? Like, I have to go get a mortgage, I have to go buy a house, maybe get it 75% of value, and then I get a hard money loan and I can flip it. But it sounds to me like there's a lot of different ways that are more outside the box to either do flipping or buy and hold or whatever strategy that they want to do.
Well, there's quite frankly a lot of deals out there, or a lot of really motivations from sellers out there that can't be solved by a traditional means. So, like if somebody doesn't have any equity in their home and they don't have, let's just assume they don't have much money available, because if they did, they probably would have been out of the property, or they might be in a better position financially, then they might not be able to get out of that home unless they're able, or unless they decide to go down a challenging route like a foreclosure or a short sale. And that isn't always necessarily the answer. Or there's lots of sellers out there that have a great property that's in really good condition, and they have a certain number in mind that they want, and they're not willing to, or have unrealistic expectations about what their house is worth. So somebody like myself or our community members, they can step in and say, look, I can get you your price as long as we're able to buy it over time. So there's lots of different scenarios out there. And the best way just to put it is just anything that the traditional market either can't solve or chooses not to solve, then that's where creative financing can step in. And that's why you're seeing this drastic amount of people now utilizing these strategies, even though we've been doing it way before it was cool. But then you see more people utilizing these strategies because of how unstable the market is and how things have transpired. Like, for example, you had a lot of good debt put into the world, right? So a lot of very low interest rates. And people bought them for the interest rate. They didn't buy them. They didn't buy houses for the purchase price. So in that scenario, if the property drops in value at all, it's not that they have all this equity to go play with in order to do it. They bought for the interest rate. So how are they going to get out of this property? So some of the only answers are us to go ahead and purchase that property. And honestly, there's a whole bunch of other scenarios where the assessed values are now starting to catch up from these homes because they drastically appreciated in value during COVID. And somebody had a monthly payment of taxes and insurance that were reasonable, and now all of a sudden the assessed value came back, and now their taxes and their insurance drastically increased. So now, if somebody bought the property for the mortgage payment, right, or the interest rate, and they were what most banks are giving them anywhere from 33 to 50% of debt to income ratio on that mortgage payment, now, if that monthly payment increases, they no longer can afford the property, even though they bought it at a really good price, right? So, or a really good monthly payment. So what are they going to do? They have to figure out a way out of this. So people like myself can step in and say, look, I know how to actually make money off this asset, and I know how to actually get you money at some point during this, or at least allow you to get out of it. So why don't we go ahead and step in and create a strategy that can create a win-win? Because really, creative financing is just as much of a skill set as a real estate investment strategy, because you first have to identify motivation, then identify the finances, and then be able to provide a solution to people that are either in a challenging situation financially or in a challenging real estate situation where they don't know what to do with their property. So, and if you can get really good at that, that's how you buy property with little to no money, without going to banks, right? And without personally signing and guaranteeing debt, because you're able to step in and solve problems that traditional market can't solve.
Wow. Thank you so much for all the great information, Zach. This has been very wonderful. We give away one free book each week to help our audience level up. Some of the books we have available are The E-Myth, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, 10X Rule, Outliers, The Go-Giver. To enter, all you have to do is like this episode and comment which book you'd like to receive. And each week we'll pick one lucky winner. And if you win, we'll send the book directly to your house. You have 5 days from the air date to enter, and hopefully we'll get you guys one of these amazing books. Zach's story is a reminder that you don't need to own real estate to control it, and you don't need to be wealthy to start building wealth. Creative financing opens the door to freedom, flexibility, and opportunity. Without banks, without huge down payments, and without waiting years to save up. If you've been sitting on the sidelines, scared of rejection, or confused by contracts, just start learning and start by asking the right questions. Because control beats cash when it's done right. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it, man. We'll stay in touch.
Yeah, let me know how I can help in the meantime, and tell everybody we said hi out there.
All right, sounds good. See ya.